Famous explorers. Ibn Battuta.
Introduction. What does explore mean? It means to travel to a new place to learn more about it. You can explore an area near your house, or you can explore a new town with your family. When we think of explorers, we usually think of famous explorers like Christopher Columbus. But there were explorers long before Columbus sailed for the New World in 1492. And there are still explorers today, like space astronauts. Want to explore? In this series of books, we will learn about some of the world's most famous explorers. Who was Ibn Battuta? Ibn Battuta was an explorer from Morocco, which is in northern Africa. He lived about 700 years ago. Some people think that he was one of the greatest travelers of all time. He went on an expedition for over 30 years around Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and many parts of Asia, including Central Asia, China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. When he finally ended his journeys, Ibn Battuta dictated his story to a writer. The name of the book is the Rihla, which means journey in the Arabic language. Early years. Ibn Battuta was born on February 25th, 1304 in Tangier, Morocco. Tangier is a large city that sits on the Mediterranean Sea. His family was from a Berber tribe called Lawata. Berbers are the indigenous people of North Africa west of the Nile River. Ibn Battuta was born into a family that studied Islamic law. He went to an Islamic law school. In 1325, he decided to go on a Hajj, or pilgrimage, to Mecca. Little did he know that he would not see Morocco for 24 years. The pilgrimage. Muslims try to make a Hajj to their holy city of Mecca, so it was not unusual for the 21-year-old Ibn Battuta to want to make the trip. What was unusual was that he traveled alone and chose the longest route. He wanted to see as much as possible. He crossed northern Africa and joined a caravan to be safe from robbers. In Egypt, a wise man told him that he would visit many places. He traveled to Damascus, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Medina before finally reaching Mecca. But Ibn Battuta wasn't ready to go home yet. Iraq, Persia, and the Arabian Peninsula. Ibn Battuta joined another caravan, this one going to Iraq. It traveled across the Arabian Peninsula, but instead of going to Baghdad with the caravan, he made a detour to Persia, which is now Iran. He spent 6 months visiting interesting places in Iran before going to Baghdad. Then he traveled north along the Tigris River, eventually visiting places in present-day Turkey. He found another caravan and went back to Baghdad and then to Mecca. He took several boats along the Red Sea to Yemen and then to the port of Aden. Eastern Africa. Aden was an important port on the Arabian Peninsula. It was the closest port to Africa, so Ibn Battuta went by boat to Somalia on the eastern coast of the continent of Africa. He traveled by boats down along the eastern coast and arrived at Mogadishu, then a very important and wealthy city. After spending time there, he went further south by ship along the Swahili coast to Mombasa and then to Kilwa in present-day Tanzania. After visiting the local sultan, he returned to the Arabian Peninsula back to Mecca once again. The Near East. Ibn Battuta wanted to work for the Sultan of Delhi in India, but to do that he needed to go to Anatolia, present-day Turkey, to find a caravan going to India. After he arrived in Anatolia, he traveled across the Black Sea to the Crimean Peninsula and then to Bulgar in present-day Russia. This was the northernmost point of his travels. He eventually turned south and visited Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. Here he met a Greek emperor. Finally, he traveled through Afghanistan to India to meet the Sultan of Delhi. India. When he finally met the Sultan of Delhi, Ibn Battuta was offered the job of a Qadi, or Islamic judge. This was not easy because Islam was not popular at this time in India. He visited places in India and saw rhinoceroses. The Sultan asked him to be his ambassador to China. On his way, he was attacked and robbed and nearly died. But he continued and visited the Maldive Islands and Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. Next, he sailed to Chittagong in present-day Bangladesh. He was still trying to get to China. Towards China. Ibn Battuta continued east and south, although China was to the north, but he visited Sumatra, part of present-day Indonesia, where the local products were camphor, cloves, and tin. Here the local sultan gave him a boat to sail to China. He sailed to Malacca on the Malaysian peninsula, then Vietnam, before finally reaching China. Here he saw many things he wrote about: paper money, fruit like plums and watermelons, shipbuilding, silk and porcelain, and Chinese food. He visited many places before returning to Morocco. The Black Death. Ibn Battuta left China in 1346 and began his return trip to Morocco. He traveled through India and Iraq to Damascus. Something new was happening in Europe, and it was called the Black Death. It was a disease that caused the death of millions of people from 1346 to 1353. It started in Asia and spread along the Silk Road, then by ships to ports on the Mediterranean Sea and in Europe. It had also spread through areas where he was traveling. He safely returned to Morocco in 1349, 24 years after his Rihla had begun. Rihla means voyage in Arabic. More travels. Spain and northern Africa. Ibn Battuta didn't stay very long in his hometown of Tangier. After only a few days, he was ready to travel again. First, he went north to the Iberian Peninsula. This consists of present-day Spain and Portugal. Here he visited places like Gibraltar and Grenada in areas that were controlled by Muslims. He returned to Morocco and visited Marrakesh and Fez before returning home to Tangier. Here he heard a story about the riches of the West African Empire of Mali. This gave him an idea. He wanted to cross the Sahara Desert. Crossing the Sahara to Mali. Ibn Battuta traveled to the northern edge of the Sahara Desert and found a caravan heading south across the desert. They stopped at a dry salt lake and later at an oasis. After 2 months, they finally reached the end of the desert and were now in the area of the Mali Empire. He traveled southwest along the Niger River to the capital of the Mali Empire. From there, he went to Timbuktu, and it was on this journey that he saw a hippopotamus. He accompanied a caravan and returned to Morocco in 1354. Ibn Battuta's Rihla. After all those years of travel, it was time to sit down and tell his story. The ruler of Morocco asked him to do this. Ibn Battuta had met a scholar named Ibn Jazay in Granada, Spain, and he was the one who listened to Ibn Battuta's story and wrote everything down. The full name of his book is A Gift to Those Who Contemplate the Wonders of Cities and the Marvels of Traveling. It's a very long title, so most people just call it The Journey. But it is the story of the 30-year journey of an amazing man. How the world remembers Ibn Battuta. The world remembers Ibn Battuta as one of the greatest world travelers of all times. He traveled over 73,000 miles and visited the equivalent of 44 modern nations. Here are some of the ways that the world remembers Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta Center Research Institution in Marrakesh, Morocco. Ibn Battuta Crater, Moon. Ibn Battuta Mall, Dubai, UAE. Journey to Mecca, 2009 IMAX film based on his travels. Movenpick, Ibn Battuta Gate Hotel, Dubai, UAE. Travels with a Tangerine, 2007 BBC television documentary about his travels. Unearthed, Trail of Ibn Battuta video game.